Good morning, everyone.
Hi.
Morning. Hi, morning.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. So I'm Caroline Burke, and I'm here because our lovely community manager, Amanda Ellis, has officially gone into maternity leave.
Oh,
So that means that I'm the interim community manager for Tedx. I'm so excited to meet all of you. I met a couple of organizers so far, but there's so many to meet. So it's a pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you for joining us today. A little earlier than usual or very late, wherever you are. Today we're presenting on copyright guidelines, and we have with us General Counsel Nishat Ruiter. And we also have Communications Manager David Rosenberg, and he's providing additional insight for us. And in our chat, we're joined by Frederica Yosifov and Licensing Associate Rafael Rivas, and they're there to answer any additional questions you may have. And a little bit of housekeeping notes. We would love for you to join with your camera. We love to see your faces. And please also make sure that your microphone is muted if you're not speaking during the Hangout. So thank you, everyone, and let's begin.
Hi, guys. Nice to meet you. As Caroline said, I'm Nishat Ruiter and really excited, and this is David.
Hey, everyone.
So we're just going to run through a couple of slides. I think we're going to try to wait for questions at the end, but please write them down or chat them to us through the Q&A, and that way we can just keep track. Because if something comes up to you, slide 3, you're like, wait a minute, we can get the questions in. Okay, perfect. So let's begin. Okay, guys. So this is the Tedx Organizer Copyright Refresher. It's to ensure that your TEDx event is compliant with copyright laws to the extent possible. It gives you a little bit of a reminder of a couple of things that some of you may or may not know. This is not meant as legal advice. This is just purely informational. And I can tell you that before I started at TED, I was also a TEDx organizer. I organized a TEDx in Hillsborough, New Jersey, and it was called TEDx Hillsborough Library. So I think some of the aspects of being a TEDx organizer is very close and dear to my heart. So hopefully we hit upon some of the right cadence with helping you with what you need. But let's begin. So just to begin, I want to go over the agenda. So we're first going to talk about why does copyright matter, understanding copyright ownership, real life examples of infringement, understanding fair use, and then tools to help. And many of you may have looked at the copyright guidelines, which we'll bring out as a tool to help you. That'll be at the end. So you may have already had a little bit of an exposure to some of the components of this. Let's get into copyright. So copyrighted materials are everywhere. Copyright owners have materials that are on the internet, right? Videos and graphics and illustrations and photos and clips. It's very easy to copy and paste. And actually, I found this really cool video from Common Sense Media that explains fair use that I'd like to launch, and hopefully we can listen to. So David, if you can launch that. Thank you.
In today's digital world, it's easier than ever to copy, paste, mash up, remix, download, and publish content. People's writing, artwork, videos, and images can be inspiring, but they're also easy to take without thinking twice. When people treat the internet like a free-for-all, legal and ethical situations can arise. That's why it's important to know about copyright and fair use. It would help you give and receive credit where credit is due. So what's a copyright? Copyright law protects your control over the creative work you make. It requires people to get your permission before they copy, rework, or share what you make. Most things that you find, download, and copy and paste from the internet are copyrighted. That doesn't mean that everything online is on lockdown and can't be used. It can, as long as you check who owns it, get permission to use it, give credit to the creator, buy it if necessary, and use it responsibly, then you're not stealing. Now, there are times when you can use a small part of someone else's copyrighted work without permission or paying a fee. This is called fair use. Fair use only applies when using content in certain instances. schoolwork and education, news reporting, criticizing or commenting, and comedy or parody. Specific guidelines, what we call the 4 points of fair use, must also be followed. First, you can only use a small amount of the work. Second, you have to add new meaning to the work to make it original. Third, you need to rework it and use it in a totally different way. Finally, you have to use it for nonprofit purposes. In other words, you can't make money off of your new creation. No matter what, it's a good idea to give credit to the creator of the work you used. It's just a sign of respect. So what should you do if you find something online that you want to use? As a rule of thumb, check who owns it, get permission to use it, give credit to the creator, buy it if necessary, and use it responsibly, which means judging for fair use. You're a creator, innovator, and inspirer. Think twice about your rights and responsibilities in our online culture, and then pay it forward.
Great. So one of the helpful parts about that video, I think it's really on point, is because it is everywhere, right? It's ubiquitous. And as we'll find out later in the presentation, fair use doesn't always apply to TEDx events for a couple of reasons. So one of the things as a TEDx organizer is you're exposed to a lot of different material. You have photo of the TEDx event that has to be original or licensed by you. You have images of the TED speakers. You have to get permission from the speakers to do that. You may use designs in your programs or your handouts or however you do it. That will need to be originally designed or licensed. And of course, the largest aspect, which is really has the most attention, which are slides that are used by speakers. And one of the reasons this is the most exposure is because the speakers are then recorded and then placed on YouTube, right? So there's worldwide access of that. We're not going to publish your program to everyone around the world, but certainly you might publish your program on your site. So slides are really important that they're fully copyright cleared. And then because you have uploaded your video, at times people use music. You can't use music that's not yours. So those are a couple of areas where the material comes from that we wanted to start with. The next piece are what's the obligations of each TEDx organizer. So coming directly from the TEDx license agreement, it does state very clearly that every talk's content must be in compliance with copyright law, and the speakers must inform you beforehand of any third-party material that'll be used in their presentations and seek written permissions to those materials where applicable. And again, the reason this is so important is because when the TEDx videos are published, the speakers get filmed, they're placed on YouTube, and then they can be licensed by TED directly or placed on TED.com. So you even have a broader audience that we're dealing with. So to understand copyright ownership, what is it really about and what does it mean? So a copyright protects the original works of authorship. This stems from historically, probably in the 1500s at least, with respect to British law and different creator law. And it's meant to protect research and development and intellectual property. And that can be done at any time, whether it's literary, whether it's dramatic, a play, a musical, a graphic, or audiovisual. All of these can be original works of authorship. And the moment you do that, the moment you snap a photograph, for example, copyright is already a part of that process. You don't even have to register to actually get the copyright protection. You have it just because it's an original work. Now, there are some cases in which different laws in different jurisdictions around the world may have a different process, but I want to speak mostly about the United States just because that's unfortunately one of the most litigious areas of the world. And when litigation happens, it'll probably come somewhere from here. It can come from elsewhere, but certainly I want to just make sure that everyone understands what we're dealing with, because whatever's posted, if it belongs to someone from the US, these are the issues that you have to deal with. So then what does it really mean? When they create that original work, they own a bundle of rights. So it's not just one right of, for example, reproduction or sale. They also have the right to create derivative works. That is their right to do, right? They can edit it, they can change it, they can do what they wish to it. They can also distribute it around the world and however they want to use it, and they can put it for public display, and also they can perform it. So interestingly, one of the most complex copyright issues arise with musical performances. And the reason why is because there's a reproduction right that the writer has, or the composer in writing the song. There's a publisher, which is the public distribution. A publisher, a record publisher, may have had a deal with that particular singer to publish their music. So that's partly owned by them. And then there's a performance right. So if you ever hear of ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, there's the right to actually publicly perform a hit song. And so you have to actually get the right to many of these. On top of that, if you ever record a video, so if you ever record a TED speaker singing a song, that's a sync right, SYNC, right? And those rights are even more expensive because then you're placing that song against a video. And so those can be very costly and very difficult to get. Mostly it takes 3 to 6 months to get those rights. So the point is that the copyright owner does hold a bundle of rights. If it's music, there are many types of owners, but if it's most other things like images and photos and things like that, articles, it's a collection of things. So to understand that a little bit more, who are the copyright owners? We're talking about music publishers and composers and performers, photographers, movie makers, designers, academics, and illustrators. We've also had, by the way, there was a TEDx performance that was a dancer. We had a dancer who said they created that dance, who contacted us and said there was infringement. So you get all types of copyright owners in this kind of area. What can they do? Well, they can control and license if they want it distributed, the type of license, if they allow someone to create a derivative work, if they want to have it distributed around the world, and if they allow publication, and if they want to give it away for free. So one of the easy misnomers is that people think when they find it on the internet that it's allowed. But unfortunately, most of the time, it's not the owners who posted it, right? It's somebody else who filmed something or took a tape of something or a recording of something. So you have to be really careful about knowing, are you actually talking to the owner or are you talking to someone who just distributed it and they weren't supposed to, right? This happens a lot in Twitter and in Instagram, where there are photographs of actors and actresses that the actor or actress never permitted, but because Instagram has become so ubiquitous, they don't end up going after anyone on Instagram because it's mostly for personal use, right? They're not going to commercialize their Instagram snapshot, right, for anything particular. If they would, then it would be a problem. So what are the implications if you don't ask? So the Tedx organizers and the Tedx speakers who don't get permission may be guilty of infringement. And that is equals to very high costs and damages. And infringement has really heavy implications. And I'm going to talk you through a couple of examples to show you the type of issues that even TED faces and TEDx has faced in the past, to give you the practical examples. Okay. So using a photograph without permission of a copyright owner can end up costing $5,000 or more. This was a case where there was a TEDx provider and organizer who took a photograph of an image of their town. Well, unfortunately, the photograph they got was a photograph that was pretty popular on the internet, but they took it without actually checking the owner. And the owner, there was a professional photographer who took the picture who claimed that it was their photograph. They're actually still debating back and forth whose photograph it is, but you don't want to end up in that situation, right? One use is enough. So if you use something, if you post a talk, if you use a slide, if you do anything, that can warrant a costly copyright violation. It doesn't matter that you only used it once or posted it once. It doesn't matter even if you take it down, the violation still happened. So permission for music, as I was saying before, because there's so many rights involved, that can take 3 to 6 months and can cost $50,000 for one use in a TEDx talk. It's very expensive. If anyone wants to play popular music, tell them no. Okay? Tedx organizers were charged thousands of dollars, $45,000 for 12 seconds of a little piece of music that wasn't even popular, that was in the beginning of a TEDx video. So, who knew that finding a clip online could be that costly just to play it in the beginning of a TEDx for about 10 seconds, right? So again, you don't want to do anything that you don't know who the owner is or where it came from. A TEDx organizer was charged $3,000 for showing a picture on their event page, right? Using 10 seconds of a Michael Jackson song, $250,000. That's crazy. And that was what was quoted to Ted, by the way. And Ted usually has a lot of leverage in negotiating. We don't, right? Because music producers and albums and people who own, these types of sync rights, very, very expensive business. So it's just really expensive, and just be very careful. More enforcement issues that I want you to understand. So YouTube uses a content management system. Now, if you click on that, and this will be available to you after the presentation, but if you click on it, and I'm going to try. Yay. Okay, there's this system in YouTube that is called Content ID. And it actually identifies and manages content that's on YouTube. And since all TEDx organizers are going to be uploading it onto Ted's YouTube TEDx channel, you are subject to this. And what happens is music owners, producers, image, video owners can actually create, it's a content fingerprint, if you will. It's similar to a fingerprint, that once it's up on YouTube, they can track if anyone's used it. This was how those pieces of music that I mentioned was found, because they looked through the content ID and immediately came up with 200 YouTube videos that used it. So it's very easy for people to find out. So just understand that YouTube has a very strong algorithm where they help owners who own copyright to battle the infringers. So it's really it's a real life thing, and it's used. Okay. Photos on the web. So I read a case yesterday that even a blogger who had a picture that was supposed to be newsworthy had to pay $8,000 for one photo. And again, maybe the blogger was using advertising or not, but that's what they were able to get. Just so you know, jurisdictions all over the world enforce infringement. There's a Berne Convention for Protection of Literary and Artistic Works. So that's an international agreement governing copyright. It was accepted in 1886. That's all the major countries, the Western and, multiple countries around the world have signed up to that. And that is an acknowledgement that if copyright is registered in your country, there'll be an acknowledgement that it's enforceable in other countries. Right? So it's just to get parity and fairness across jurisdictions where people are exercising their copyright rights. What are the penalties and what do they look like? So $200 for the infringers who had no idea what they were doing and are usually a service provider. You guys would not qualify as a service provider, unfortunately. You have to actually register under the Copyright Office. TED is a service provider, so the costs are usually kept really low if we're found to infringe. But the penalties go up to $150,000, right? They also are able to get defense costs and attorney costs, which, as you probably know, are very, very expensive. That can go triple or quadruple the amount of violation that you have to deal with. And you have to remove it. So kind of the basic rule of thumb is, why put it up if you'll have to remove it anyway and pay tons of money for it? Check it in advance. Yeah? What about fair use? So this whole notion of fair use, we talked about it. It was mentioned in the video. So let me just bring up a couple of misconceptions first. But I only use 5 seconds of music and video. It should be fine. Oh, it was on internet and YouTube. Everything there is on the public domain. Or it didn't have the C mark, that C with a circle, so it's cool. I can't get sued because it's fair use. Fair use is too difficult and confusing. And if I add, no copyright infringement was ever intended, please accept our slides as is, it will not help you, right? So just to give you a sense of what fair use is, and I've had TED speakers say this to me, they've said, oh, I got it from the fair use law. I'm like, oh, there's no such thing, but that's okay. Let's walk it through, right? It's a defense to infringement. It's not an actual right, okay? And there's a couple of factors. So it's based on the 4 factors. And the reason I kind of put this up all at once is because those 4 factors really are evaluated by the judges when these things come up. This is not something that you can go and click and say, oh, it's based on fair use, I've got it. It's a defense to infringement. So if you get sued, then you raise this as a defense, right? So it's a difficult process to undergo. So I'd want you guys to really know kind of how much detail is required to defend it. Purpose and character of the use. Is it not for profit or educational, right? What's the nature of the copyrighted work? Is it factual or creative expression? How much are you using it? So in the video, kind of showed how much of this are you using? Are you using a little bit, or are you using the whole thing? And the effect on the potential market. So does it prevent the owner from making money? Okay. Now, when you go into the fair use examples, these are the fair use examples that have been supported by court, right? Criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. So if you're asking whether TEDx Talk can qualify, well, it's a mix. On the one hand, TEDx includes a lot of criticism and commentary, and in many cases, people are reporting on various statistics and information. And one could say that every TEDx talk is teaching. However, it is not appropriate to assume fair use each time, because the video and the license to the TEDx talk can also be licensed. You'll see on YouTube, for example, there's advertising that sometimes comes before or after. At times, TED may license this. And we all do this because we're not for profit and we all support our mission. So there's many different areas of revenue that TED will receive so we can provide free TED Talks to the world, right? So as a result, once it goes on, for example, on TED.com, we have to make sure that we have permission every single time. So it's just a rule of thumb to keep in mind. The other point is it depends on what the TEDx speaker is talking about. If they're promoting an idea that has to do with a new business model or something else, and they want to talk about a product or doing something, one could say that's also for providing support and promoting. So it's a really fine line. So I don't want to tell you that all TEDx's are fair use. In fact, I'd rather have you assume the opposite. Have you assume that unless it's statistics or a quote that you're posting on there as text, which you can just cite where you got it from, having pictures, images, clips, videos from any person, you really need to get permission. So I want to walk through a couple of tools for you, but I also want you to know that the factors that align with that is, is the showing limited? How big is the audience? So if you know that TEDx is only happening in your 4 walls, you know what? It may be okay, but where does it go? TEDx goes on YouTube, right? So automatically, if you're going to ask, well, what's the audience? And this is, by the way, one of the factors that comes into play when licensing music or licensing photographs. How big is the audience? And TEDx always wants the biggest audience, right? So unfortunately, it's not easy to say, well, we put it on YouTube, but we were only expecting 100 people, right? You're going to expect many, many people. So that's a big factor that weighs against TEDx being fair use. Another one is, does it negatively impact the copyright work? Is it said in a way that harms the person who provided the photograph? Are you commenting on a logo of a company? Are you saying something that's a critique about a movie, be very, very careful, because if the TEDx speaker is going to put someone down, believe me, that person will hear about it and they're going to want to do something about it. So be wary of that. Is it factual? So it's different if you're going to talk about statistics or how many news articles were in something, or, what's the statistic around use of something. If it's factual, that's one thing. And also if it's non-creative. If you're just identifying a fact, that's better than if you're not. The content that a TEDx speaker will provide you will include slides, visuals, pictures, clips, and music. So this is kind of a tool to help you understand, okay, this is what you'll get from them, and then how do you break it down and evaluate it? So to the copyright owner, a picture, music, or graphic plus a TED Talk equals money, right? They want money, they need to give you permission, or it's infringement. To a TED Talk speaker, a picture, music, graphic plus a TED Talk means it's free and it's fair use. So often you'll find TEDx speakers not understanding this, because many TEDx speakers assume that it's completely free and clear and they didn't have to get permission in the first place. So it's much better up front if you talk to them about it when you're organizing and you're talking to them about their idea. Mention these things to them that make sure they do have permission. That helps in the long run as they're preparing their talk, so they know in advance. So to the TEDx organizer, when you see a picture, music, and graphic in the TEDx talk, you can do three things. You verify permission, you convert it to fair use, or you delete it. All right? Those are kind of the steps that I think are going to be helpful to you. And what does that mean? So when you look at source material, have the slides been vetted? When someone submits music in their TEDx talk, visuals on their site, clips that are owned by speaker, or pictures, or using words and text and statistics, that's the stuff that you'll be given. So what do you do with it? Ask the speaker for approvals. When they submit music, don't use it if it's not original or fully licensed. If there's a visual, use an original or create it yourself. Many of our TED speakers actually creates their own illustrations, right? They get drawing, they use Prezi, they do something else, and they recreate a graphic that they found. Easiest thing to do, right? Licenses are very expensive if they're well known. So if you spot anything in a slide that's a well-known logo or a well-known clip or a well-known artist or a star, that is going to be a problem for sure, right? Check the owner's picture to make sure that, who is the owner? Are they okay with it? Make sure they allow you full permission. And permission really means, if you've seen the photographer release that's in the toolbox with Tedx Organizers, or even the release that you see for speakers, you'll see that embedded in those license and permissions is worldwide, perpetual, use in any way. Those are important, right? We need those types of language to ensure that we can do whatever we want with it, because once it gets on a TEDx video, it can go everywhere. And then always, unless the person said you don't need to credit me, always add the source in the credit. You can do that on the bottom left-hand corner. If it's a photographer that you have a license to, make sure that you put that, source : photographer's name, however you do it, but that's also really important. Websites and helpful sites. So we have copyright guidelines that I'm just going to jump over in case you haven't seen it. These are guidelines that are to you. You can print them out. It kind of explains what we've discussed, but it explains them in groups of types of content. So slides, we want you to check and make sure that it is appropriate and original content. Third-party content, it's protected by copyright, so you should not download it on the public site if you see it. Photographs, again, talking about images, and then looking at clips of music and animations, and then performances. And again, performances, if you're even going to perform on stage, if it's a song or music or however you do it, that will be very lengthy process, because you'll need the rights to do that. The second page explains a little bit more about fair use, which is what we talked about in our discussion. So it gives you the 4 factors, so it helps you understand what to do. And then we have a small graphic, which is third-party content permissions. Certain things are easier, like, so for example, when displaying statistics or factual information, just identify the source, right? A formal release isn't really required. But stock images, those managed by Getty, Shutterstock, other companies, check to see if you can create your own image instead. Permission is otherwise needed. And difficult, again, highly visible brands and logos. Speaker slides. So there's a great site on Tedx, which is not going to move there. But if you go to the speaker guide, Mount Hood, Tedx Mount Hood provides this great visual speaker guide that I thought, I used it for our TEDx, and I thought that it would be really helpful if any of you have not seen it. It kind of visually explains the TEDx talk speaker presentation in a great way. It's really helpful. It's easy on the eyes. And of course, there's a reminder of making sure that the slides are, original content. So here it talks about, what's the point, images, graphs, and ensuring that it is also copyright protected. And this mentions also creativecommons.org and attribution, right? So they're saying that always cite the source, even if you're using a Creative Commons license. So that's a helpful tool. Creative Commons types. So a lot of people don't know that Creative Commons is a license type that has many different licenses. So if you go to this link, you'll see a full definition about what Creative Commons is, and it explains the rationale, but it also explains the different types. So there's different types of licenses, and then I just want to scroll down. These are the different types. So, CC BY, it lets others distribute, remix, tweak, as long as you credit the original creation. CC BY SA, it means you have to share it at the same way that you're doing it. However, the problem is, we do share TEDx under Creative Commons, so that is okay. But in certain cases, we may license it separately. So it's just something to keep in mind, that you just want to be careful which Creative Commons you want to use. CC BY ND means you cannot change anything in the image. You have to share it in the way that you received it. Now, the other one, CC BY NC, which is attribution non-commercial, you're not allowed to have any money associated with it. So for TEDx, it won't work, because if there's advertising or if it's ever licensed, it would not be appropriate. So these are just different types. So it's a helpful tool for you to understand how these work. The the fair use video, which I still think is really helpful for speakers to look at, to understand. And then there's certain sites like the Met Museum that provides their images under public domain, which is not the same as Creative Commons. It means that they're giving it to you with no associated copyrights. So they have offered this to you, and it's really quite incredible. It's a whole description of what images you can get and that they're in public domain. So in those cases, the museum has waived any copyright that it might have. There are obviously some images that are under copyright, but you can search the site and find images that will have this symbol, and you can see which ones do and which ones don't. It'll have a CC0 symbol, Creative Commons 0. So if you see that on an image, you can download it and use it. Public domain photos or Creative Commons. So this is Pexels.com. It is listed as one of the best free stock photos in one place. So they have photos that are under public domain that they have on their site. So again, if you see an image and it says CC0, you're able to download it. Okay? So these are a couple sources for you and the speakers to understand where can they get access to other types of things. And that's it. So I hope this was really helpful. We're going to leave it open now for questions. And I wish all of you guys a lot of luck and working with the TEDx speakers to make sure that everything is copyright compliant.
Great. Hey everyone, I'm back here. I have some questions that you and I can go over that I've gotten from a few people.
Okay, great.
First, I was wondering, sometimes I hear people, there's an image that's really old, for example.
Yes.
Is there ever a time when an image is open and you can use it? Does time play a factor if it's from like 1900 or something?
Yeah, there's a copyright law depending on which jurisdiction it's in. So part of it is understanding the copyright law expiration, like here in the United States, depending on where it was copyrighted or when. I think prior to 1976, there's one law, post 1976, there's another, and it's the life of copyright, sometimes plus 20 years. I don't even, but you can look it up. You can look up public domain and check if that photograph seems to align correctly with it. And there should be other sources of that photograph, but in certain cases, that certainly is the case. You just have to make sure it's from the right jurisdiction that applies.
And then also, how about sort of reappropriation? Sometimes someone makes an illustration based on a photograph. Is that law then still with the photographer? So if someone took a photograph of someone and then someone created an illustration of that photograph and put it as a slide, would the photographer then still have a right to come after the copyright for that?
So the way the courts look at this is they weigh the four factors. How much of the photograph was used? What's the nature of what you're doing? What's the nature of the work? Did the photographer lose market value or did something happen? And what's the ultimate purpose? So the transformative piece of it is really important. There's been several artworks that have been found to be fair use or an expression of art because it was transformed. Okay. Right? But I can't tell you, as long as you have this much, it'll be transformed. It depends on the person. It depends, when you know it, you know it. Yeah. So unfortunately, there's no bright lines, but that is certainly guidance. And again, those four factors, if you can walk through them and try to find out, where does this stand? There's a lot of examples online that will talk about what has been viewed as fair use. Yeah. But again, it really depends on those factors.
And that's the same with, let's say you have a performer and they're doing a cover song. Obviously, you were saying that's one of the rights.
That's never fair use.
That's never fair use.
Never, ever, ever. Not that I know of. I've never come across a situation where music is actually deemed fair use, depending on the context. So.
And also, I don't know if all of you know that Nishat organized a TEDx event before she came to TED full time. So she's got a lot of experience directly with what you're all dealing with too. Were there times when you had a speaker who was insistent on using something, or they really wanted to use a slide, or they felt like their talk was going to be compromised because they weren't allowed to use something? Do you have any experiences with that?
So I had spoken to our TEDx speakers, and because I'm an intellectual property lawyer, I know about this, right? So when I spoke to the TEDx speakers, we had a lot of discussions around that, and one of our speakers was a Taekwondo instructor, and he actually took photographs of his class, and we ended up getting a release from every one of his students. And he was so diligent in doing that, but that was really important because the images of those people were going to be on the web and on YouTube. Yeah. And we wanted to make sure that each of the children, especially because they're under 18, that the parents also agreed. So we had to not only get the children's rights, but ensure that the parents said okay. So that was some of the complications that we went through, but we had told the speakers way in advance, guys, by the way, if you're going to use any pictures or images, use your own. And again, only use them to amplify your TEDx talk. Don't use them because so many people use slides kind of as second nature, but they don't realize that in the context of a TED talk, I think slides have to be really, really carefully thought out to ensure that it hits the right point, doesn't take away the attention from the speaker, and of course is appropriate to use.
So would you say a general rule is that everyone should get rights that are worldwide and in perpetuity, or what
Yes.
is that the blanket kind of?
Yes, exactly. Perpetual rights and perpetuity. You can look at the photographer release. I find that interesting. And also there's other third-party content release samples that maybe we can end up sending out to some of the people on the phone on the webcast to help out. But I think that, worldwide, perpetual, for the use that it was in the TEDx talk. Mm-hmm. We're not going to take someone's photograph, and this happens at TED a couple of times. People get nervous that photographs that's been used in a TED talk will be used on their own, right? But that's not the context. The context is it is one of the slides that's recorded when you're recording the stage that you can see or not see. And you may choose to edit that slide out because you're focusing on the speaker because of a dynamic moment that you want to focus on. So actually, it gives some of these other individuals a little bit better feeling that we're not taking their photo in and of itself and exploiting it. Okay. We're just using it in the context of a TEDx presentation.
Okay. So we got some other questions here. This one is about the cost of infringement and where responsibility lies.
Yeah. So the Tedx Organizers in the licensing agreement does cover and is responsible for the TEDx speakers, the selection of the speakers, the curation of the ideas, and vetting all of these. It is a very important responsibility, and part of that includes a responsibility to indemnify and help in the event that there's a claim to be there to help support and defend. Now, with respect to costs, luckily, because TEDx is generally a not-for-profit situation, or always, we have had success when there has been issues raised. We have actually helped out and provided insight to the person who raises the infringement to say, look, you really should settle. This really shouldn't go to litigation. We believe that the speakers or the TEDx organizers were completely, they did this not intentionally, so there are arguments you can give that support the issue that it shouldn't be so costly, but you can't control it. You don't know what's going to.
Got it. Yeah. So if someone gets hit with a infringement for $45,000, like you were saying, that's who ultimately is responsible.
So the TEDx speaker organizer is responsible, but also the speaker is responsible. So when you have each of the speakers sign a release, they have written and included in that release, which is the template agreement that we have, which states that they're responsible for the content that they post, right? So the TEDx speaker should be signing that release, and that's why it's so important to keep that on record, because they're going to tell you, oh, I got this photograph from so-and-so, I got this content from so-and-so, here's the permission or whatever, but you're relying on them. Right? So they are ultimately the person who's going to be responsible, though the TEDx organizer is responsible for choosing the speakers, right? So there's kind of a co-opting responsibility. It's really kind of everyone's really a stakeholder.
And then also for them, when you sign these agreements, because I know some people say, oh, I got it in an email and someone said, okay, that's fine. Or like they reach out for permission. It's like, but what do they really have to have on that permission? I mean, it needs to be, because I do hear this from people saying, oh, it was a verbal agreement, or, you don't want to go forward with something like that, I would assume.
No, verbal agreements are not good, but, one of the things that I think is really important, that the person really has to authentically understand what permission they gave. So even if you wrote down something and you're like, oh, permission for TEDx, please, is that okay? And they said approved, and you didn't specify it's going to be used worldwide, it's going to be used perpetually in whatever way that TED and TEDx deems appropriate, you're not really getting the full scope. It's the understanding of the person who's giving you the license that's super important. So yes, it should be in writing, because if we end up having an issue, or if you end up having an issue, you want to show that record. If it's signed, it's better. If it's dated, it's better. If it's official and completely in clear language, that's even better, right? The more clarity that you have as to what was the understanding at the time, the better off you're going to be. And I'll tell you, I've litigated in the beginning of my career, judges will read something and they're going to take the plain meaning, right? So I'm not a big fan of a lot of legal language. I think legal language is important when you need it, but I'm a fan of clarity, unambiguous terms, right? So how are you going to use the TEDx talk? Where is it going to be used? Who's going to be using it? Are you paying them something or are you paying them nothing? Those terms are super important to put in there. Oh, I paid you $1,000, Oh, I paid you $0, but you said it was okay. You were agreeing that because it's in a TEDx talk, you're fine. Those kinds of things are important to include. I can't give you specific legal advice as to what the waiver should look like. Again, jurisdictions differ and situations differ, but clarity is really important, and having it in writing is definitely best practices for sure.
And then also, what about sort of aesthetics? Like, let's say when you do a photograph on a screen and you're getting permission and someone wants a credit, because I know often in the Creative Commons it'll say it has to appear this certain way, there has to be a credit.
Yeah.
Is it sometimes okay to put a title slide, like a credit slide? Is that usually being able to be negotiated where you can say, I don't want to put the credit directly on the slide? Are those things that sometimes are open to negotiation, or you want to do like a slide at the end?
No, I actually prefer slides on the slide itself. And the reason why is because at times the initial slide or the end slide may not be used if it, for example, goes onto TED.com or other places. And so it gets lost, right? It's really simple to have the most discreet way to do it is to have it be an animation that appears for about a second. And in the animation, you can say source, photographer, blah, 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 and then you have it disappear. Right? So you had it when you saw it, and then it goes away. The other way is to have it like 12-point font on the bottom left hand, or even on the vertical axis, whatever way you do it. But it's really better to have it on the slide itself, just because it's clear to the person whose photograph it is, and then you don't have the risk of removing a credit in the beginning or post-roll or whatever at the end.
How about for music? Is that usually just an agreement? You don't have to say anything on a slide, like the music is from, or make an announcement. That's usually kind of just part of the.
It depends what you're talking about. So often, if you have a musician, there are composers involved, there's writers involved, there's record publisher involved, and so you have owners of that. So you'd have to give that proper credit. Where that happens, it depends on where you put the music. And frankly, I don't know how common it would be for TEDxers to use music.
Yeah.
But because there's so many rights associated with it.
Yeah.
And again, what you do in your four walls of the TEDx event, I'm not saying that you can't play music in a library, for example, during the way the speakers walk in the room. What I'm talking about is recording that, okay? There's separate rights in playing music within a TEDx event, different from actually recording the music. So I just want to make that distinction because those are two very, very different things. You still need rights to perform, to actually publicly listen to that music, which you can do from some of the recording groups like CSAC and BMI and that kind of thing. Or the event may already have that license when you're renting a location. But what I'm talking about is when you're actually recording music for whatever reason, that's when many of the rights are involved.
Great. We also have a question about translations of speaker releases and it's not okay and what to do. What exactly?
I am not sure the context of the question, but I think we have it in English just because we want to make sure that it's written. I think there's no objection to have a second speaker release, but it has to be, kind of at the same time. So you would need the English and you would need the other language at the same time signed. And we don't have a way to validate the translation. The problem is that, oftentimes legal language has a very specific, unique approach and linguistic wording choice when you're dealing with translations, and not all legal translators understand that. So one word can make a difference. If you don't say perpetual and you translate that to mean sometimes, we're gone, right? That's a real problem. So that's why I think the legality of it, we really need the English one signed. But certainly if you have to translate it for someone, that could then be done simultaneously. It would just need to be attached to the English one, and they would still need to sign the English one.
We're getting close to the end of time. Is there anything that you feel, if like a parting word, like is anything that someone should really take from this the most? Like, what do you think is the most sort of common violation or common concern that a lot of organizers have, or that you see comes up frequently?
I would say images are the biggest issue, because that seems to be the most used content where speakers are trying to get across something, and they will assume that they have the right to use it because they didn't know what's right and what's not. They didn't know what was fair use or what's not. So it's really important in advance to let the speakers know what they can and cannot do, to give them that guidance, and then to get validation, right? And just to make sure that they have permission to use it and where they actually received it. If they said they downloaded it from Flickr, that doesn't mean anything, because Flickr has a bunch of third-party rights that are associated with it, and there are photographers on there, and it's really important to ensure that they have the permission to use it or it's copyright compliant.
Yeah, like, so maybe a little bit about that Flickr, because that is a lot where a lot of all the TEDx organizers put the photos from their events on there.
Right.
So as long as it's a clear copyright, like you say, everyone has permission to use this, then it's okay.
Yeah, but again, you're using it for personal use.
Yes.
The restrictions on Flickr is some of them will say personal use only, not for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
So once you download a Flickr picture, even if it's a TEDx picture from another TEDx event, and then you put it in the TEDx video, and then if there's advertising or if it's licensed, then you're using it for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
So it's really meant to be personal use, which means not putting it in a TEDx talk.
Yeah, sure.
Right? And again, it's because of the scope of it, right? How many people will see a TEDx talk? Hopefully all the TEDx talks that you guys are organizing will be seen by the world, right? So the more the better.
Great. Is there anything else we did?
Any questions?
Those are all, yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. Okay. I just want to thank you guys so much for your insight and for your wisdom, both of you. And thank you to the community. We're going to post this up on the TEDx Hub with Nishat's wonderful presentation as well. And if you have any other questions, please post them there and we'll do our best to answer them. And thank you again. We really appreciate it. Have a great week. Bye.